Hi, my name is Nicole Perez, and today I will be going over an analysis of A Brave New World and how it relates to the topic of reproductive rights issues. First, I'd like to go over what is A Brave New World. So, A Brave New World is a novel, it's a science fiction novel written by Huxley, and it was originally published in 1932. The book opens up in a world called New London, and its government, the name of the government is actually called the world state. So in order for the world state to function, it abides under its guiding motto, which is called community, identity, and stability. All of these factor into how society functions, especially the social order. The social order is highly integral into the way the world state functions. So you must be thinking, what does AF stand for? It's after Ford. Why Ford? So Ford is actually a variation on the name Sigmund Freud. He's a famous psychologist. I'll talk about him more later as it's important to understand Freud's part in this world. So what makes the world state different from us? So they have three interesting characteristics that distinguishes them from us. So they have social hierarchy, artificial wombs, and conditioning. So all of these tools are used to maximize human happiness and to shape and control the society. So, for example, the book opens up with the director of hatcheries and conditioning giving a group of students a tour of the factory that produces human beings and conditions them for the predestined roles in the world state. And so a social hierarchy is heavily emphasized in this world. So, for example, we have the alphas and the betas, which are the elites of the world state. And the gammas and the deltas and epsilons are more so the inferior, the lower castes. And these lower castes are more subject to the forces of the mechanization and the labor, whereas members of higher castes are they're more elite and they're in charge of the most important stuff. You must be wondering, what are artificial wombs? In the book, they're commonly referred to as blood surrogates. The most important thing about this book is that children are no longer born naturally or conceived naturally. They're actually, the book explains it more so as they surgically remove ovaries that produce ova, in which then they're fertilized in artificial and incubated in specifically designed bottles. And then conditioning. Conditioning is something a famous psychologist, Ian Pavlok, and he basically introduced how you can have an unconditioned response, as you can see this dog is salivated, and an unconditioned stimulus, which is the piece of meat. Once you associate with the unconditioned stimulus and the bell, which is the neurostimulus, you can then condition the dog to have a response to the bell, which may indicate that food is coming. So children, babies even, all of them, and every caste are conditioned to their roles in society. For example, also their attitudes are heavily shaped by conditioning. So alphas are conditioned to think that they are superior. For example, a beta would say they hate epsilons, not because they hate epsilons, but because they've been conditioned to hate epsilons. So I want to go into depth about what artificial births mean in this society. So there is the Central London Hatchery and Conditioning Center and fertilization rooms. So we have something called incubators and the Volkovsky process. Incubators are blood surrogates. So the alphas and betas are offered the luxury of being kept in incubation until they are bottled. they take very good care of the alpha and beta since they are the elites of the higher caste of the society, and they are decanted one by one without any artificial intervention. Whereas the gammas, deltas, and epsilons undergo this process called the Volkanovsky process, which is also a cloning process. These lower castes are more subject to these processes because this facilitates social stability, since the clones it produces from one egg are predestined to perform identical tasks at identical machines. Sometimes their environment is tampered with. For example, in epsilons, they would decrease the amount of oxygen they're getting because they're the least of the castes. There's no such thing as mom or dad. So what I mean by this is that humans are no longer able to produce living offspring. So in essence, no one is a parent figure here. They're all sent to a conditioning center. Well, children are brought up and raised to believe certain beliefs according to which caste system they correspond to. So what does this mean about social relationships and how they function as a social society? So the term monogamy is not used. I think the most equivalent thing is a swear word. I would relate it to a swear word. Partners in long-term relationships are heavily frowned upon. Everyone, it aligns with their guiding motto. People don't have a distinct identity. They all belong to one another. This is why sexual promiscuity is endorsed. So going back to Sigmund Freud is basically the sex symbol in psychology and even in popular media. So because of his theories, they increased sexual promiscuity in children, adults. To not introduce sexual promiscuity in children is also a bad sign. People are conditioned to be sexually promiscuous from a child to even adults. So if you're not going out there having sex every minute of every day, you are frowned upon and you'll probably be exiled. Since children are decanted is another word for saying given birth to or birthed or popped out of the bottle. The term mom and dad are obsolete. So I think another way of saying it is, for example, when you go to a religious family and you talk about sex, they get flushed or they get embarrassed because the word itself is just something you don't say in public. That's the closest thing to how they would say it in this book. So saying mom and dad would make another person so embarrassed and so ashamed because you're not allowed to be a parent figure. You're not allowed to be a mom or dad. You're not allowed to give birth and raise that child on your own, as it would go against the social stability and function they have in the world state. So the Savage Reservation. So something that popped into my head a lot is the rest of the world like this? And the answer, in fact, is no. The rest of the world is not like this. There's only a few places on the earth left where people remain in a quote-unquote state of nature, or regular people. They still give birth to children naturally. People are still monogamous. They're less likely to be sexually promiscuous. They're not conditioned. They're in their normal state. For example, in the world state, you don't see people being sad. You don't see people being old or ugly or fat, because they've all been designed to be perfect, even epsilons in their own way. So people in the Savage Reservation, they're all shapes and sizes. They're not taking care of themselves. They're in poor shape. And so they're still having child regularly. They're looked down upon, so they weren't considered worth civilizing. A lot of the residents in the Savage Reservation are called Indians. The book does not make it clear if they are actually Native Americans, so I can't say if they're a diverse population. So, main characters, John, or in the book, he's called the Savage. He's the son of the director and Linda. He's the only main character to have had parents from the world state and been produced naturally, conceived naturally, and he spent his life being an outsider on the Savage Reservation because of this. And similarly, when he went to go live in the World State Society, he's also seen as an outsider because he's a savage. Bernard Marx is an alpha who's rumored to have had alcohol placed in his incubator, and he's always felt insecure about this, and which is why he's discontented with the world state. Melina Crow and Linda are two of the people that stood out to me in the book. Lilina is a beta, and her values are extremely strong, and her beliefs are extremely loyal to the world state. She has a weird relationship with John because she's unable to share affection with him because of her system, her values. Linda is another very important character in the book because she was John's mother, and she was a beta, and she became pregnant, and she conceived him naturally, gave birth to him, which is something that you've been conditioned not to do, so you can understand like the dilemma she faced. So during a storm, she got lost, suffered a head injury, and was left behind. A group of people found her and brought her back to the village in the Savage Reservation. She was unable to get an abortion on the reservation and was too ashamed to return to the world state with a baby. She was a mother, the thing they were conditioned to not say, hate, and not be. Due to her conditioned sexual promiscuity, it further makes her a social outcast on the Savage Reservation, because you would see how that would become a problem with you sleeping with a lot of people in a place where it's not acceptable. She's desperate to return to the world state, especially with her son. So some unconventional names for some conventional practices would be free martins, pregnancy substitutes, abortion center, Malthusian belt, and Malthusian drill. 70% of female fetuses are sterilized. Before they are born, they are sterilized and ensured that they will not have any children, as having children on your own will ruin the social stability and how people function and their predestined roles. A free martin, however, is capable of reproduction, but they're conditioned to use contraception in the open society. So a lot of birth control is forced upon them. You only see free martins and alphas and betas. You don't see this in the lower castes, because if lower castes were to have children, they'd be having inferior children. They don't want that. A pregnancy substitute, it's the equivalent term for birth control. So basically, it's they're injections that are used regularly to trick the body into thinking it is pregnant and balances hormones. It's a form of birth control, and that's basically what it is. The abortion center is referred to as the lovely pink glass tower, which I thought was funny. Again, if you were to miss an injection, if you were to miss something in your steps, you would have to go to the abortion center to get an abortion and not have that child, because again, it is frowned upon and you will be ostracized, as Linda was. A Malthusian belt is basically a belt that carries their contraception. And the prettier the belt, the higher your class is. But again, it's just among betas and alphas. A Malthusian drill, I thought it was an actual drill, but it wasn't until later in the book where they said it was just a phrase for practicing contraception. So it's kind of like how you track your cycle when you're taking birth control pill. And the reason for these names, such as the Malthusian belt and the Malthusian drill, is actually named after Thomas Malthus, who is famous for showing his ideas on rapid population growth and the decrease in resources and supplies. Huxley is actually, I think, a genius for doing this because this book was published before the invention of the pill. And the fact that he speaks about population growth and the decrease of resources and the betterment of a new species is something that aligns with how the world state views things and how they condition people to think. So now off to the topic of reproductive rights and how it's seen in a Brave New World. So the practice of eugenics is completely evident in this book as their efforts to create a new human species in social caste to better function and support the society is very important. They use processes such as the Volkanovsky process as a form of eugenics, just to ensure that the lower castes are genetically inferior and higher castes such as alphas and betas are genetically superior. Also, you can see that 70% of female fetuses are sterilized, such as the lower caste, to eliminate natural conception of children and limit the amount of inferiority they see. In the years that followed the publication of Brave New World, a new movement called eugenics would seek to achieve similar controls over human variability. We also see this in the Nazi Party, Germany, where they used forced sterilization to produce a new species to eradicate existing groups such as the Jewish people. Just the only difference here is that it wasn't exactly used to eradicate people, but more so modify them and place them in social castes that define their genetics. Forced sterilizations, even though the child hasn't been born yet, you're taking away the choice of them having children. And we also saw this in class when we viewed the documentary on Novas Bebés, which examined the forced sterilization of Latina women. And then going back to the idea of Thomas Malthus, where the high increase of world population and the scarcity of resources is something that was mentioned in this documentary too. Both the film and the book talk about issues of overpopulation. And we can also see this in the belt and the drill when they're controlling how many babies there are produced. It's not really explained in the book as to why they allow some women to become free martins. I'm guessing it's just in case they need to remove ovaries to produce more children. The dehumanizing of women is something that's seen in this book quite a lot. The pregnancy substitutes are a further example of how the state controlled the society and how every aspect of humanity is controlled. And people become dehumanized to make them easier to control. You're taking away the choice of a woman choosing to have her own children. If they do become pregnant, they simply go to the abortion clinic, but it's more so of a conditioned response to pregnancy. So you're not allowed to have children and you're taking away that right. Dehumanizing here is seen as they're depriving of producing children of their own. And when they do, they're ostracized and shamed, as we saw in Linda, John's mother. Pavard's The Right to Know actually is a very important comparison in this book, because Pavard spoke about the latency in sexual revolution due to the lack of education. Whereas here, you do see an immediate response to contraceptive methods and sterilization and the spark of sexual revolution. They're heavily sexually promiscuous. They're out there having sex without worrying if they're going to get pregnant. But it's not because they know. It's more so because they've been conditioned to take the pills or conditioned to go have sex because they know they've been sterilized. And I think that's an important comparison to make, because it's really interesting how a society was conditioned, whereas the other one, you have to more so like get the resources because you don't have the education to do so. So our time period versus A Brave New World. So obviously this is a dystopian novel that warns us of the evil inner workings of bureaucracy, but I think it also, since it was published in an earlier time, it warns us of the reproductive rights issues that we have overcome and those that still lie ahead. And it also warns us about the possibility of artificial genetic selection and population control. We're entering in a new era of genetics where people are going over custody battles of unborn embryos. And I think that's something really interesting, because I think it's something we never thought we would get to. Like I said, Huxley wrote the pill before it was invented, so the pregnancy substitutes and injections are basically the pill. And he envisioned a sexual revolution, and I think it wouldn't be possible without doing something or creating something that was similar to the pill. And I thought that was really interesting. My recommendation, I completely recommend for people to read this book. It's a very fantastic read. It's been recently adapted into a movie and a new series on Peacock. So, because they're sexually promiscuous, you're gonna see a lot of scenes. So if you want to watch it with other people, I would just keep an eye out for that. But overall, I think it's one of the books where you need to read it. It's like a book that you need to have read once at least in your lifetime. And with that being said, thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and have a good one. Thanks.